There's a lot of different things that every investor should be looking out for, and the basics is okay. Everyone just assumes getting the documents is the hard part, but often you'll be able to get the documents, but somewhere within those documents is a red flag or some kind of problem that the immigration attorney really has to identify. One of the key challenges in immigration law is just the variance in languages, right? So especially when you're dealing with detailed financial documents, you want to have certified translations, right? Now these are not very difficult to obtain. There are plenty of companies out there that immigration attorneys are aware of that they can use to get translation of these documents, but you want to make sure they're certified and that they are complete, right? So when you're getting all of these employment records, you're getting salary certificates, you're getting proof of distributions, you're getting bank statements done. You want to make sure that all these documents, if they're coming from overseas, that they are translated correctly and completely. Even a minor accounting error on a translated document can lead to a really, really big problem down the road, right? It seems so obvious, and yet we've seen it so many times where the original document actually showed an investor making a certain amount of money, but because of a missed zero on the translation, USCIS is really, this officer is looking at the translation saying, hey, this guy only made $5,000 a year, when really it was like $500,000 a year. So you really want to be careful and double check all the translations to make sure that there's no issues there, that nothing's been missed, and everything looks 100% correct. And this really does come down to having a very detail-oriented immigration attorney. Um, Another thing that you want to watch out for, right, and we kind of alluded to it, is you got to make sure that appropriate taxes have been paid, right? If you've been making money as a solo, as an entrepreneur for the last, let's say, 10 years, and you've basically just been, keeping that money and not paying taxes, that's a problem, right? Although USCIS is not the IRS, they certainly will look at these funds as not being clean for EB-5 purposes. So whether you're in the United States, whether you're overseas, whether this money has been obtained previously through third party employment and they withheld taxes for you, or you're now basically your own business owner and you're responsible for paying your own taxes, all tax liabilities have to have been taken care of before these funds can be used for EB-5. And I think really importantly, everyone should think about taxation as kind of like fruit of the poisonous tree, right? If 7 years ago you've got unpaid taxes in that 1 year, that could come down, and even though we're 7 years later, that could affect your present, that could affect your EB-5 application. So making sure that all tax liability has been covered for all of the funds that you're going to be using is extremely, extremely important. And then the last thing, and this one I think becomes really, really, this is the one I probably see the most often, and what really ends up being a challenge for countries, especially like India, where there's a lot of investing going on pretty much at all times, is tracing from source to the current account. Okay, so let's just use an easy hypothetical here, right? You're a very successful employee at a large company. You've made a lot of money over the years, and you realize that keeping your money just in an account isn't very fruitful for you. It's not, your money's not doing anything further for you other than just sitting in an account. So what do you start doing? You start moving that money around. Maybe you loan it out to a friend who's starting a company, expecting some equity in that company. Maybe you've just put it into the stock market. Maybe you've got a stock portfolio. Maybe you've got other investment opportunities that you've put your money into. And now it comes time that you're going to do your EB-5 application, and you realize, okay, hey, I've got all this money in different places. I need to bring it all back to my account so I can make my EB-5 investment. That's totally okay, right? There's nothing there that you did that was illegal, but you're going to have to show all of those steps, right? If you loan money to a friend who started a company, they're going to have to show that influx of capital in the company's account. They're going to have to show that company is legitimate. They're gonna have to show where they're paying you back from. If you put money into a brokerage account and that brokerage account has grown, that one's a little bit easier. The brokerage account can issue you statements, and those statements will show what your money was invested in and how it's grown. But if you're doing this a lot, let's say you're putting in, a certain amount of money maybe every week and you're taking it back out and then putting it back in, then you start to establish a pattern, and it can become very cumbersome to showcase all of these different steps and trace all of these various sources of investment that you've put your money into back into the current account from which you'd be investing. So this is a really, really common problem. There's a lot of creative solutions to this, and especially, in my experience, I've seen a lot of folks from India, especially, that have just a lot of different places where they're moving their funds around to. You want to narrow it down to 3 or 4 different things that you're doing with your money and only use those funds, right? So find the path of least resistance. And then secondly, you want to establish a pattern and make sure that it seems legitimate, right? If you're earning money as an entrepreneur, what is your business in, and what experience previously led you to have that experience, right? Similarly, when you're investing, what is it that is leading you to, generate such high returns, right? Are you just giving money blindly? There has to be some kind of story that makes sense. Like, okay, I've got a friend, he's starting, a chemical company. I'm a chemical engineer. I decided to invest in that company. As a result, my shares or equity in that company grew, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's really important to formulate that narrative and provide as much legitimacy as you can through documentation to USCIS. I think it's very tough to see a bunch of accounts that have 100% tracing. You're just not going to normally see that. But you can kind of bypass a lot of issues by giving USCIS as much information as you can about your basic pattern of investing, how you've moved your money around over several years. Once you've established that pattern, show, okay, through the course of my normal investments, here's how much money has been earned and come back to me over the last few years, and that's the money I'm now using for my investment.
Got it. And Ahmed, for Indian investors, particularly those bringing funds over from India, what are some things investors need to keep in mind? And also in terms of hiring an attorney, how important is it to work with someone who's not only familiar with the US kind of taxation system records, but also, even though India is a different country than the US and it follows different rules, that those rules also need to have been, complied with respect to showing that the EB-5 money was earned appropriately.
Absolutely, yeah, you hit the nail on the head, Sam. It's so important, right? And India is a great example of this because it has very specific rules, not just for earning money in India. So you want to make sure you're working with an attorney who understands taxation issues in India and how they must be resolved. But also they have a lot of currency export restrictions. For example, moving money outside of India has become quite expensive and quite a pain. And working with an experienced Indian source of funds attorney can really help alleviate a lot of those problems, right? You'll save probably several thousands of dollars because there are a lot of creative ways to move those funds overseas. Sometimes you just have to bite the bullet and pay the tax, but speaking with the right attorney who can kind of strategize correctly, take advantage of any exemptions that do exist and save you as much money as possible is very important, not just on the immigration side of things to make sure that you're compliant, but it could also save you several thousands of dollars. And then, yeah, I think to your point, moving the money from overseas to the US, this is always, always, always a place that can lead to a lot of problems in EB-5 source of funds. Like I mentioned really early on, source of funds everyone focuses on, but path of funds is equally important. In fact, the big attorneys out there, the established law firms in the last 10 years that have experienced any denials, they've mostly come on the path of fund side and not on the source of funds. So working with an attorney that's familiar with whatever locale it is that you are located in as an investor, whether it's India, it could be Vietnam, for example, that has high currency export restrictions. You want to make sure you're working with an attorney that understands the local environment in which you've earned and are now transferring the money out from, and also the US environment where you're transferring the money into. So very, very important, and that importance can't be stated enough.